If Dave Van Horn and the Arkansas Razorbacks are going to get over that hump and win that elusive national championship, they're going to need some dudes to do it. Arkansas's had a lot of great players come through campus over the last several years, and this year's no exception. But who are going to be those top guys this year? Does Arkansas have enough? And who are the guys that are going to have a good chance to be top MLB draft prospects, which we know you need to win a national title for this year's team? Everyone wants to know that. So let's talk about it.
You are Locked On Razorbacks, your daily podcast on the Arkansas Razorbacks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, Razorback fans? I feel the need every time I hop on this screen to talk about a little baseball, to talk some diamond. I feel the need to offer up this disclaimer that I know football is just around the corner. I know the football season is coming up and the season's getting started. And so some of you are really focused on that. And that's perfectly fine. I'm excited for football season 2. We've done a great job covering it on Inside Arkansas Live and on the Locked On Razorbacks podcast. We've been crushing it with the daily content. So I hope you guys don't feel like you're not getting that fix or that I'm trying to distract you from the ultimate prize or whatever the case may be. But I love baseball and I'm going to continue to talk baseball and use my platform to do that. And also, I know that when February rolls around, a lot of you guys are going to have some of these questions of who are the guys? Who can we trust? What's the lineup going to look like? Are any of these guys going to get drafted? Like, these are the questions that usually come around during February. So I'm just trying to get this off my chest now so you guys don't have to worry about that. And like I said, we're getting our fix. We're covering the football. We know basketball is just around the corner as well. Coach Calipari's first season, and Curtis has been doing a great job covering that. But we are going to continue to talk baseball. And I also want to mention that things are going to heat up on the baseball front just a little bit. In just a couple of weeks, Arkansas will be starting fall practice. School just started Monday, and so they've said they're going to start practice a little bit earlier. And so we'll get our first real look at some of these guys and how we feel about them, see them in their Arkansas uniforms. And fall ball is usually when you start to make or break who's going where, who's a real dude, who's going to be able to fit into this spot, and who's made that jump on the roster. And so I look forward to covering it and breaking it down and sharing all that with you guys. But on today's program, I did want to talk about the top 10 Razorbacks on this year's team that I think have a chance to be top prospects in the 2025 MLB Draft this summer. And before, I also want to make a clear disclaimer that if you look at Arkansas's roster, a lot of the best draft prospects on the team, a lot of the guys with the best long-term potential in this sport are not eligible for this year's draft. And so when I eventually get to that list, it's going to be the top 10 guys of draft eligible players on this year's Arkansas roster who I think have a good chance to be drafted. That list is not going to include Ryder Helfrich and Nolan Souza and Gabe Gackle and a few other top guys on this year's, or top prospects on this year's team that are just simply not eligible for the draft. So I don't want you guys to think I'm omitting anybody or anything like that. But it is interesting when I think back to the 2018 season, which for me is the standard for Arkansas baseball. That's the best team, at least in my opinion, of my lifetime that I've seen. I'm sure some of you guys agree. The team that should have won the national title was perhaps a foot or two away from doing so. But from a roster standpoint and from a just program standpoint, I feel like that is the standard that Arkansas needs to be continuing to chase. And when you look back on that team, they had no shortage of draft prospects. I mean, obviously, Blaine Knight was drafted pretty highly. You had Carson Shaddy, who was a senior. You had Luke Bonfield, who was a senior. You had Eric Cole, who was a junior. You had all these older pieces, but you also had a good sophomore class in Dominic Fletcher, Isaiah Campbell, and a few other guys. Jack Kinley, who ended up being a really huge player for them next year. And then you had a really good freshman class led by Seston Kerstad and Casey Martin, and a ton of arms, Caleb Bolden, Bryce Bonnin. So what we've learned over the years is you really do need some contribution from all of your classes, freshman to senior. And I think that's what I really like about this Arkansas roster is it's not just a bunch of seniors looking to one last ride, make it happen. It's not a bunch of draft eligible juniors where, yeah, you might have a great season, but then you look ahead to next year and you're like, oh man, the cupboard is really bare and we're going to have to replace this whole roster through the transfer portal, which isn't as hard as it used to be back in the day. But I think Arkansas this year has a nice little mix of talent in their freshman class, sophomore class, junior class, and even some seniors, some grad transfers. They pretty much have it all. But if we can just start, I think honestly, if you ask me my opinion, I think the best overall prospect on the Arkansas Razorbacks roster right now, I think it's Gabe Gackle. For those of you that remember us back in the day, Gabe Gackel was the first ever guest of the Bombastic podcast. So basically, I'm responsible for all the success in his career. And so I think he should have me to thank for that, of course. But I also think this is a guy that, if you're looking ahead to next year, is going to have a chance to be a top 5, 10, 15, top 30, whatever you want to put the barometer at. I think he has a chance to reach it. I think he has a chance to be one of the best collegiate pitchers in his draft. And it's interesting, Hagen Smith was just drafted 5th overall to become the highest drafted Razorback pitcher ever. I don't want to put that on Gabe Gackel and say, oh, yeah, he's going to just waltz right in and do the exact same thing. But it is kind of interesting that as soon as Arkansas has a pitcher who sets that record for the highest drafted Razorback pitcher, they've got a guy in Gabe Gackel on the rise who is going to be in that same type of conversation. He was a huge prospect coming out of high school. He was obviously a massive piece for Arkansas at a sub-3 ERA as a closer, as a true freshman. Showed he's kind of built for those moments. So if he's able to join that Arkansas rotation this year and be a legit Friday, Saturday starter, I think he's definitely a guy we're going to be talking about this time next year as one of the best players in his class. And another one I wanted to mention for you guys, Nolan Souza and Camden Koziel. Nolan Souza obviously started his career at Arkansas, played a good bit as a freshman, had some ups, had some downs, but you saw the potential, you saw the flash there. I think he and Koziel both, Camden Koziel coming from Vanderbilt, we talked about him a little bit on last week's show. I think both of these guys are guys who had solid freshman years, but are really more talented than they even showed and could be taking those steps this year. That's a big question for this year's roster is, does that sophomore class really take that step forward and become true legitimate guys? And I think Ryder Helfrich is another one you need to throw in this mix, although I'm a little bit more confident in Ryder Helfrich that he's going to live up to this great potential that we all forecast for him. And if you don't believe me, just look at his Cape Cod numbers because he was crushing over there. Hit 11 home runs this summer. And so we feel like he's on the right track. So, I mean, that sophomore class has a lot of very interesting pieces in it. So this time next year, we're going to be having a very similar conversation, and it's going to be a very fun one for Arkansas fans to have because there's just so much talent at every level. And then just even going on down to the freshman class. I mean, obviously Carson Wiggins, another guy we've talked about on this show that turned down a lot of money this summer, was a very highly regarded prospect in his class. He's going to be a freshman at Arkansas this fall. I try to avoid placing draft expectations on guys who are just now starting their careers, unless, of course, you're in the MLB draft as a high school kid. But Carson Wiggins, all indications are this is a high-level arm who's going to have a chance to be in that mix. Should also mention the left-hander Cole Gibler, who's another one, a top 150, top 200 prospect overall in last year's draft, one of the better arms in his entire class. And so I would imagine he's going to be right there in that mix, and we'll see how both those guys are able to fare. And on the position player side, Arkansas's got a freshman in Gabe Frazier, who is another one who was on that ledge of like, could he sign? Could he come back? Or could he go to school? We'll see. He ends up going to Arkansas, and we'll see if he's able to crack a lineup that's going to have a lot of experience, a lot of talent returning in it. But I think all these guys have a nice chance to solidify themselves as on track to being legitimate prospects this fall and this spring. And, it's fun. As I mentioned, fall ball, there's going to be plenty of radar guns out, plenty of teams, MLB teams that will be represented at Arkansas's fall practices, which just tells you the talent level of this team and tells you how highly respected this program is and their ability to just consistently crank out top talent year in and year out. And I think this year is going to be no exception. I think Arkansas's got no shortage of talent in each level of their class, from freshman to senior to even grad transfer guys. And so without further ado, it is time for us to get into our top 10 of the actual draft eligible prospects on this year's Arkansas team. We will get into that list, but first we're going to take a quick break. Well, Razorback fans, the summer is almost over, but football season is just around the corner, which means it's snack season. That means it's grilling season. That means it's barbecue season. Stock up on all your favorites and earn cash back on every purchase when you use Ibata. So you won't have to choose between burgers or hot dogs or whatever it is. You can get it all with Ibata, which is a free app that lets you earn cash back every time you shop. Earn on hundreds of items from groceries to beauty supplies, even toys, so you can make sure you're beating inflation no matter what you're buying. The average Ibata user earns $256 per year, which could obviously cover the cost of your entire grocery trip, maybe pay for that flight you've been eyeing, maybe take you for a nice fancy dinner to impress your girl, whatever the case may be. Right now, Ibata is offering listeners $5 just for trying Ibata using the code Locked On College when you register. Just go to the App Store or Google Play to start earning cash back on every purchase and use Locked On College. That's IBOTTA in the Google Play or App Store and use code Locked On College. Uh, Okay. So now we are on to what I believe, and this is, again, this is very subjective. This is subject to change. This is not like a definitive list at all. But here are the top 10 Razorbacks that I have. If I were, an MLB franchise and I was scouting these guys and I was kind of making my list, this is about what it would look like. We are going to start at number 10 with a young man that you guys are familiar with. His name is Ben Bybee. He will be entering his junior year at Arkansas this year, finally draft eligible now. And he's an interesting one where if you look at his career, he's got a 6.51 ERA in his 2 seasons at Arkansas, which, of course, obviously doesn't jump off the page and may concern some of you as like, oh, this is one of the best guys on the team or whatever. But Ben's earned a lot of time on the mound in his first 2 years at Arkansas. I mean, he started a ton of midweek games as a freshman, started midweek games last year, despite having some mono that set him back early in the year. And honestly, I was very impressed by the strides he took. I thought he took a massive leap from year 1 to year 2. He's thrown 56 and 2/3 innings in his first 2 seasons. He's a big, projectable guy, 6'4", big body, the kind of frame that MLB pitchers really like. He's also a guy who's got some starting experience. We saw him come out of the bullpen and be really effective in the NCAA tournament against Kansas State. And so I feel like Ben Bybee is a guy where this offseason is a big one for him. And we'll find out really soon here in the fall if he's taken that jump and he's a legit weekend rotation or huge piece in the bullpen. I feel like if he's able to take that jump and join Arkansas's elite top arms, he's going to have a good chance to get drafted. And frankly, we've seen a lot of Arkansas pitchers over the years that didn't have a massive role in the team that still got drafted. I mean, I'm looking at you, Elijah Trest. I'm looking at you, Mark Adamiak. I mean, it's if you're pitching at Arkansas under Matt Hobbs, you're going to have the attention of MLB scouts. I mean, Ben Bybee's a guy who's been up to 95, 96 with his fastball. Again, like I said, big, projectable. I think he's going to have a good chance to be in that mix going into his junior year. Number 9 on our list here, another guy that you guys are very familiar with. His name is Kendall Diggs. Ever heard of him? Yeah, Kendall Diggs became a fan favorite early in his career at Arkansas. Massive sophomore year. We hit 12 home runs, drove in 63 runs, hit 299. And at that point in time, I mean, if you would have told me that he was still going to be on campus right now at this time, I would have said something went wrong. And something did go wrong. He suffered a torn labrum in his shoulder, tried to play through it. We saw Peyton Stovall do a very similar thing the year before. Now, I don't want to compare he and Stovall as prospects because I feel like even dating back to their high school years, Stovall was kind of the more well-rounded, more like solid projected prospect that everyone knew was going to be drafted eventually. Kendall Diggs wasn't necessarily quite as highly regarded, but I mean, after their sophomore years, Kendall Diggs was a guy that we all kind of expected to be drafted as a junior. The question here is he doesn't really have a foolproof position. He's not a for sure right fielder, for sure third baseman, whatever. So we'll see how MLB teams view him in that regard, if they feel like he can play the outfield or if they want to try him at first base, third base. You've got a universal DH these days too, and so I feel like a left-handed bat with like Kendall Diggs, and if he has the year that we all kind of expect him to, I think he's going to have a good chance to be in this mix. Fast forwarding to next summer. Moving on to number 8, this is a guy that I am a lot higher on than I think the general public is, but it's Cooper Dossett, who is a Springdale boy who has just finished up his sophomore year at Arkansas. He's another one who has not done a ton throughout his career that would make you think like, oh, this guy is for sure getting drafted. But if you look at the talent, you look at the stuff, you look at kind of the projection, I think he's got a good chance to be a big piece for Arkansas in the pitching staff. And I think he's also got the talent to be a guy that intrigues a lot of MLB teams. I mean, he was up to 95, 96 with his fastball. He's comfortably in that like 92, 94 range. He has a nasty slider. He strikes out a good bit of guys. I mean, he had 20 strikeouts in 15 innings last year. He's thrown 17 and a third innings in his entire Arkansas career. So a little bit of a Jake Faraday career arc for him is kind of what I'm forecasting here. But I mean, we just saw Jake Faraday get drafted and signed for a pretty solid amount. And so I'm not saying Cooper Dossett is guaranteed going to be that situation, but it wouldn't be out of the ordinary. There wouldn't be it wouldn't be without precedent, I guess I should say. And another thing about Cooper Dossett that I want to say before I move on here is he had a 5.14 ERA last year, which again, you look at it and you're kind of like, oh, that guy's not that great. But if you really look a little bit closer, almost every base runner he allowed scored. I mean, he gave up 6 hits and he walked 7, and he gave up 9 earned runs. So just about all of his 14 base runners, 9 of them scored. He got a little bit of tough luck, and a couple of those happened with him not even being on the mound. And so I think he's a guy who has a good chance to take that step forward as a junior. And I think if he's Arkansas setup guy, he's going to have a good chance to get drafted. Moving on to number 7, we've got the Canadian. We've got the Florida Gulf Coast transfer. Our first transfer on the list here, I guess, Charles Davalon. I've heard 4 different ways to say his name, and there's another tough to pronounce name on this list coming later that we'll get into. But Charles Davalon is what I'm going to go with for now. He's who I have projected to start at center field for Arkansas, and he just came off of a freshman year at Florida Gulf Coast where he hit 284, had 10 home runs, 13 stolen bases. You see plenty of flash. You see he's a well-rounded guy. He's a good athlete. Now, he was playing a lot of corner outfield in his freshman year. I think for him to get drafted and really live up to some of the potential he has, I think he's going to have to move over to center field and fill that spot. But I think he's capable of doing that. He's another one where he's got some buzz as a guy that could be a second, third round pick. I don't think he's going to necessarily go that high, but he is draft eligible as a sophomore. So there's a very good chance he ends up, maybe getting drafted later and coming back for his junior year. We'll see how that plays out. But I think if he ends up starting at center field, I think he's going to have a good chance to be in this mix. I really like his skill set, really like his upside and his projection. So we'll see if the Canadian can live up to that billing. And number 6 on this list is a guy, Brent Iredale, who has turned out to be a pretty polarizing figure for Arkansas, because everybody was really upset that I didn't mention him on our first Bombastic podcast here on the Locked On Razorbacks podcast. But Brent Iredale is a guy coming from the JUCO ranks, coming from New Mexico Junior College, hit 25 home runs. So the power potential is there. He was also one of the top 5 JUCO prospects going into this year's draft. I mean, he was a guy that, frankly, we weren't 100% sure was going to come to campus to play for Arkansas. He ends up making it, which is nice. And I think Arkansas has a nice track record when it comes to developing JUCO guys, spotting them, and developing pretty well. I mean, Jalen Battles was drafted, Trevor Steffen was drafted, Hunter Holland was drafted. And outside of the non-drafted guy, he's had a ton of guys who have contributed. I also should mention Ben McLaughlin, who was just drafted last year. But I mean, you've got guys like Brady Slavens and Matt Goodhart who have had big impacts for you out of the JUCO ranks. I'm not saying Brent Iredale is guaranteed going to be in that mix, but certainly wouldn't surprise us at all. And I think he's got a chance to be a middle of the order bat who I think if I had to start right now and make a lineup, I think I would have him at third base for Arkansas. And so I think you guys are going to be intrigued by Brent Iredale and what he brings to the table. Little Caleb Cali-ish. Let's just say that. He's a little Caleb Cali-ish. And so now we will move on to our top 5, which is where it gets a little bit more definitive here and where it becomes a little bit more of less projection and more, this is what this guy is going to do. But before we do that, we will take one more quick break. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, which is America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have something a little bit different for you now. Between now and September 22nd, so you got about a month, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with the YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. If you're a football fan like I am, and if you're a bettor, if you're a fantasy football player, if you just enjoy the sport, enjoy watching the games, NFL Sunday Ticket is a must. So FanDuel's offering you a nice little situation here. Just visit FanDuel.com/locked-on to download America's #1 sportsbook. If you think Arkansas can win more than 4 games this year, you can go on FanDuel right now and you can get that over at -122 at 4.5 wins. Pretty good deal. You get the Sunday Ticket involved with it. Like I said, visit FanDuel.com/locked-on, America's #1 sportsbook. Okay, and we are on to the top 5 here, and we're going to speed run through these a little bit. The Ohio State transfer, Landon Bedelshis. Again, I don't know if that's how you pronounce his name. We've heard a few different things. We'll find out in the season what his name is, but he's a big left-handed pitcher, a guy that I feel like is going to be Arkansas's Sunday starter when this things get said and done. I was looking at a list today. Prep Baseball Report had their top 50 college pitchers, and they have him at number 41 on the list, which is, a respectable spot. That means you're probably getting drafted in that, 7 to 10 round range. And that's pretty similar to where Mason Molina ended up. Now, I said it on a previous podcast that I feel like this Badelshi is a little bit less talented than Mason Molina, I guess. Like Mason Molina has a little bit better pure stuff, but Badelshi's a little bit more well-rounded, a little bit better command, and has worked deeper into games throughout his career. And so I think that's something that Arkansas fans will enjoy quite a bit. Might not be quite as attractive to MLB draft scouts, but I do think he's a guy who's going to have a very good chance to get drafted. So I have him number 5 on my list, and we'll see. He's got plenty of room to fluctuate. Maybe takes a little bit of a jump forward. I mean, he's a guy who could. Left-handed pitchers are hard to find, and so I feel like he is going to be highly regarded this time next year. And number 4 on my list, I have a guy who was not on that top 50 list, but a guy that I'm kind of projecting to be in that mix, Gage Wood, right-handed pitcher from Batesville, Arkansas, has kind of taken some nice steps in his career. He closed games as a freshman, closed and started games as a sophomore, had a really good summer in the Cape Cod League. I feel like Gage Wood has a nice chance to take that step forward and be a legitimate dude for Arkansas, whether that's out of the bullpen, whether that's starting. I think he's going to be kind of Arkansas's Evan Ashtonbank for what A&M did for them last year. I know Ashtonbank's left-handed, but sort of the catch-all reliever that can long relieve, can close, can just put out fires, do whatever you need. I expect Gage Wood to have a really solid season for Arkansas, and I think he's going to be an intriguing name with his stuff and the way he throws and just the bulldog mentality he has. I think MLB scouts are going to have him firmly on their radar this time next year. Number 3 is another guy who was on that list, and another pitcher, Christian Fouch, who came in same as Gage Wood. Pitched a little bit as a freshman, had his ups and downs, had more ups and downs than Gage Wood, frankly. Then as a sophomore, just explodes onto the scene with a sub-1 ERA. He throws 100 miles an hour, so I don't feel like I need to sell you guys too much on this one. But Christian Fouch is a guy that I think is going to be a hot commodity next summer. He's number 37 on that Prep Baseball Report list of the top 50 college pitchers. Of course, he is more of a reliever. I don't anticipate Arkansas is going to use him as a starter. I don't anticipate MLB teams are going to look at him as a starter. I think he is a very obvious put him in the back end of the bullpen and let him flame show it up. That's what he's going to do for Arkansas this year. I think he's going to be very successful doing it. And I think he's going to have a good chance to be a top, 5, 6, 7 round pick when next summer's draft rolls around. Number 2, we're going with one more pitcher. And I know this list is a little pitcher heavy, and so you guys might not be thrilled about that. But if you look back at history, 3, maybe 4 position players drafted is about as much as you could ask for realistically. Obviously, like we talked about earlier, there's some younger guys on this team that have a chance to be in that mix. But I think that pitchers, it's going to be a pitcher heavy draft, and Matt Hobbs develops arms. What do you want me to do about it? But at number 2 on this list, he's number 7 on Prep Baseball Report's list of the top arms in the country, or the top college prospects in next year's draft. I've got the ECU transfer, Zach Root, who I feel like I've kind of thrown a Hagen Smith comparison to him. I want to be clear. I'm going to look in the camera when I say this. He is not Hagen Smith. He is not going to do what Hagen Smith just did. I'm just talking about from a eye test, looking at him stuff. Honestly, I mean, not quite on the level of Hagen Smith. I don't think many left-handed pitchers ever are on quite that level, but mid 90s with the fastball, hard slider behind it. It's going to be a dominant 2-pitch mix. And I think he's going to remind you guys a little bit of Hagen Smith. He's going to be like Hagen Smith light, which as a Friday, Saturday starter, it's pretty good. And I think he's going to have a chance to be a top 2 to 3 round pick if he's able to take another little jump under Matt Hobbs. Wouldn't be surprised if he's one of the best college pitchers, period, in his draft next year. And the number 1 prospect on the team, of course, the Hawaiian shortstop, Vahiva Aloy. He's coming off of a really solid year. I mean, he hit 14 home runs. I know he hit 270, which was a far cry from what his batting average as a freshman at Sacramento State. But if he takes the jump I'm expecting him to take, which if you look at his Cape Cod numbers, it seems like he's well on his way towards doing that. I think he's going to be one of the top players in his draft. I saw MLB.com had him as the number 11 overall prospect in the draft, and they kind of viewed him as potentially a offensive-minded second baseman. I think his defensive instincts have really taken a jump here in the last couple of years. He impressed me a lot on the defensive side of the ball, and so we'll see if he's able to stick a shortstop. If he sticks a shortstop, I don't see why he's not one of the top 2 or 3 in his position in the entire draft. I think, based on the talent he has and the kind of year he might be able to put together, I have no doubt that he's going to be in the mix as one of the most talented players in the country. We'll see if that ends up being more in the top 10 range, top 30. Worst case scenario, he plummets all the way to like the top 50 range. But Vahiva Eloy is one of the better players in the country. You guys are going to have a lot of fun watching him play baseball. And we can't wait to cover it here on the Locked On Razorbacks podcast. I appreciate you guys for joining me for today's episode of the top draft picks in on this year's team. It's going to be a lot of fun covering this team and getting into fall ball. We can't wait for it and appreciate you joining on today's show.